The galaxy had lived under a fragile peace for hundreds of years. Dozens of alien civilizations coexisted, some great and wise, others young and still learning the ways of space. The Intergalactic Council, made up of the oldest and most powerful species, had worked hard to keep wars from breaking out. But behind the curtains of peace, pressure had been building. Among the newest members of the galactic community was the Terran Federation, humanity. They were different from the others. Humans came from a small blue planet called Earth, and though their technology was not as advanced as the older species, they were fast learners. They built cities in space, turned barren moons into homes, and pushed into deep space faster than anyone had thought possible. Other species watched them with both curiosity and caution. The Council often debated whether humans were a danger or a miracle. Some admired their progress, others feared what they might become, but none could ignore them. Then came the Zorath. The Zorath were not new to the galaxy. They were old, far older than humans. They had vanished long ago into the dark parts of space, leaving only stories behind. Those stories spoke of destruction, of empires burned to ash, and of worlds left silent. So when strange signals returned from deep space, when ships started disappearing and colonies went dark, the fear that filled the Council was cold and heavy. When the Zorath finally showed themselves, there was no warning, no words. They descended, like a shadow on Darson IV, a human colony at the edge of the galaxy. They came in ships shaped like knives, dark and silent, and they struck without mercy. Darson IV was a peaceful world, filled with farmers, scientists, and children. It had little defense, and the Zorath wiped it clean in hours. The Intergalactic Council hesitated. They called for caution, for understanding. But humans did not wait. The loss of Darson IV echoed through every Terran outpost. News of the attack spread like fire, and with it came something the Zorath had not expected: rage. Not the rage of chaos, but the cold, focused kind that changes history. In the capital world of New Terra, the Federation leaders gathered. They didn't argue. They didn't debate. For once, all sides of the human voice spoke as one. Humanity had lost a colony, but it had found its purpose. They declared war, not just for revenge, but to protect every world they had built and every life that called them home. This was not a simple fight over territory. It was survival. Across the stars, human shipyards lit up. Old warships were brought back to life. New ones, stronger and faster, rolled out of factories at speeds never seen before. Engineers, soldiers, scientists, and civilians worked side by side. Colonies that had once stayed apart now shared resources and strength. Humanity was uniting, not out of fear, but out of the belief that they would not fall quietly. They had never been the strongest, nor the most advanced. But they had something the Zorath did not understand: the will to rise after every fall. The galaxy watched, unsure of what would come next. Some thought the humans were rushing toward destruction. Others felt a shift in the stars, as if a sleeping giant had awoken. No one could deny that something had changed. This was not just another war. This was the beginning of something far bigger. In the dark of space, where hope often faded, the spark of human defiance had been lit. And as the first Terran fleet moved out to meet the enemy, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. For in the coming storm, humanity would either fall or rise as a force the galaxy could never ignore again. The war against the Zorath was not going as the galaxy had expected. In the early days, the Terran Federation had stood alone, surrounded by silence from the other major powers who watched with caution, perhaps even doubt. The Zorath were ancient and powerful, with weapons that could crack the crust of planets, and fleets that had survived for thousands of years. Many believed humanity would fall within weeks. But something strange began to happen. The humans didn't retreat, and they didn't break. Instead, they adapted. Every battle brought new lessons, and the Terran fleets adjusted faster than anyone imagined. Where the Zorath fought with predictable patterns, the humans changed their methods each time. One day they would strike from behind asteroid belts, using cloaked drones, and the next they would fake retreats only to circle back with hidden reserves. Their ships, while smaller and less advanced at first, began to evolve. Engineers on board made changes mid-battle, reprogramming weapon systems and redirecting energy flows in ways the Zorath had never seen before. Humanity, it seemed, was not bound by tradition or protocol. They thought differently, fought unexpectedly, and that made them dangerous. As the humans started to win battles, small ones at first, then major turning points, the galaxy started to take notice. The Council, once cold and dismissive, held emergency meetings behind closed doors. For the first time in centuries, the old alliances between alien races began to crack, not from war, but from the realization that humanity might actually succeed. The first to respond was the Rigel Alliance, a proud warrior species known for their discipline and honor. They had long refused to work with humans, whom they considered too chaotic. But the Zorath had begun to press into Rigel space, and their defenses were crumbling. When they received a signal from a human captain offering a joint strike plan that could save 3 Rigel colonies, they accepted out of desperation. The plan worked, and worked brilliantly. For the first time, Rigel soldiers saw human fleets not as reckless amateurs, but as strategic masterminds. Soon after, the Nykiri hegemony, highly advanced but politically fragmented, sent delegates to New Terra. Their data scientists had studied human movements in space and found patterns no artificial intelligence could explain. The humans, they said, were unpredictable not because they lacked logic, but because they fought with purpose, emotion, and hope. The Zalnar Confederacy, a mysterious race that had stayed neutral for centuries, finally broke their silence. Their Star Reader monks had sensed a shift in the flow of time and declared that the Path of Flame had begun, a prophecy that spoke of a new power rising from a distant world. They, too, chose to join the fight. Slowly, old rivalries began to fade. Enemies who had once fought wars over territory and trade now stood on the same battlefield. The Intergalactic Council, realizing that their own survival was at stake, gave their silent approval. Ships bearing the banners of dozens of worlds began arriving at human-controlled spaceports, and at the center of it all stood the Terran warships, massive, powerful, and unlike anything the galaxy had seen. These ships did not rely solely on raw power. Their strength came from adaptability. Human vessels were built to evolve. Each ship had teams of engineers, AI companions, and crews trained to think like scientists and soldiers at the same time. Their weapons were not always the biggest, but they struck with precision and timing. The fusion of creativity, bravery, and human stubbornness made every Terran ship a force of its own. As the alliances grew stronger, the Zorath began to feel the weight of a united front. But what terrified them most wasn't the fleets or the firepower. It was the knowledge that humanity had become something the galaxy had never seen before, a spark that could unite even its oldest enemies. And deep in the dark reaches of space, where the Zorath watched in silence, a question began to spread like a whisper among their kind. What happens when the species you underestimated becomes the fire that lights the galaxy? Across the stars, something strange happened, something no one could explain at first. The trade channels grew quiet. Long-range sensors detected unusual energy readings, and the space around human-controlled sectors grew tense and still, like the deep breath before a storm. Then, without warning, the silence broke as 900,000 Terran warships emerged from hidden fleet yards spread across the vast territory of the Terran Federation. From asteroid bases, planetary bunkers, and deep space construction docks, they rose, Like a wave, a sea of steel and light, spreading through space in perfect formation. These were not ordinary ships. Each was a floating fortress, equipped not just for battle, but for endurance. Every vessel carried layers of shielding, advanced AI-driven targeting systems, and weaponry that combined precision with overwhelming force. Some were so large they carried smaller fleets inside them. Others, swift and sharp, could cut through enemy formations like blades through silk. It was more than a military force, it was a message. This armada was not just sent to fight, but to end the war. The size of it stunned even humanity's allies. Never before had so many ships moved at once. The older species of the galaxy, those who had fought 1,000 wars across time, had never witnessed such scale, such unity. For centuries, the galaxy had believed that humans, though clever and strong-willed, were limited by their young age among the stars. But this proved them wrong. Humanity had not only caught up, they had surpassed every expectation. As the Terran Armada moved like a single shadow across the void, the galaxy held its breath. The Zorath, scattered and confident in their dominance, suddenly felt the ground shift beneath them. Their scouts were the first to vanish, erased from existence without a trace. Communication lines fell quiet. Listening posts stationed near the border of Terran space picked up the first images of the oncoming fleet, and what they saw left them in shock. A storm of ships, dark and silent, moved toward Zorath space like a tide that could not be stopped. Panic began to ripple through their empire, yet they tried to remain proud, convinced that their ancient power could hold. But the Zorath had made a mistake, one that could not be undone. They had believed that because humanity once fled, they would always be weak. They had thought that destroying a colony would break the Terran spirit. What they did not understand was that humanity was not bound by fear, but driven by it. It made them build, fight, and rise stronger than before. Each warship carried not only weapons but stories, names of lost cities, images of fallen loved ones, and the memory of Darson IV, the spark that had started it all. Even those who once doubted humanity, old council members, neutral systems, rival species, now watched in silence, unsure whether to fear or admire what they saw. And as the human fleet passed through sector after sector, with no resistance, and no sound but the soft hum of their engines, the galaxy grew quiet. Not a single Zorath force had yet dared to challenge them. In command centers light years apart, commanders and diplomats whispered the same words: "Something has changed." This wasn't just another battle, it was the beginning of a reckoning. The silence across the galaxy was not peace, it was suspense, thick and heavy, as all waited to see what would happen when the unstoppable met the unprepared. And in the heart of the Terran flagship, Admiral Kalen stood before a large, star-covered display, his eyes locked on Zorath space, knowing the time had come. They would not wait, they would not beg. Humanity had come not just to fight, but to finish what the Zorath had started. At the very edge of Zorath-controlled space, where distant stars burned dim and silent, the first real battle began. A clash, so immense that even the cold of space seemed to tremble. The Zorath, proud and unshaken for centuries, had gathered their strongest forces: colossal dreadnoughts, sharp-edged cruisers, and swarms of attack vessels, all moving as one dark wave, to meet the human threat. They had faced countless enemies before, and always crushed them. But this time was different. As the Terran Armada entered the sector, it did not slow or scatter. It moved with the confidence of a force that had prepared for this moment. The human warships, once thought too light for direct conflict, revealed their true nature. Reinforced, with advanced alloys, shielded with new energy fields, and controlled by battle-hardened commanders, these ships did not break. They took the full power of Zorath fire and answered with fury. The first clash was violent and fast. The Zorath struck hard, sending their oldest dreadnoughts into the center of the Terran fleet, But instead of crumbling, the humans split formation and performed the Dark Fleet maneuver, something only they had dared attempt, hiding hundreds of ships within the shadow of a passing asteroid field, using gravity and silence to vanish from enemy scans. When the Zorath advanced into what they thought was an opening, the hidden Terran ships emerged behind them in perfect timing, catching them in a devastating crossfire. It was not just brute strength that won the moment, but strategy, creativity, and timing. Explosions lit up the darkness, and within minutes, entire squadrons of Zorath ships were gone. Leading the charge were the Phoenix-class warships, massive and sleek, designed not only to destroy but to command. These ships carried precision weapons, long-range ion cannons, and smart missiles that could predict enemy moves before they made them. Their commanders worked together like parts of a machine, each move feeding into the next. The humans didn't fight like individuals. They fought like a single mind, sharp and unbreakable. As battle reports flowed into distant systems, the galaxy watched in disbelief. For so long, humans had been seen as scattered and unrefined, but now their fleets tore through the Zorath lines like wind through dry leaves. The dreadnoughts of the enemy, once feared above all else, began to fall one after another. Each time, a human warship was hit, another took its place. Every explosion was followed by a counterstrike. And still, the Terran forces pushed forward. Even in the heart of chaos, they moved with discipline and resolve. In command centers far from the front lines, other species watched the battle unfold through live data streams and long-range scans. They saw not only power, but purpose. Humanity was not just fighting to win. They were fighting to survive, to protect, and to prove they belonged among the stars. There was no hesitation, no turning back. Even when the Zorath unleashed new experimental weapons, trying to shift the balance, the Terran fleets adapted again. Shields were reconfigured, energy redirected, and AI systems rerouted to find new angles of attack. No tactic worked on the humans for long. It was as if every ship, every crew member, had been preparing for this exact battle their whole lives. And in truth, they had. From the fall of Darson IV to the rise of the massive armada, every loss, every lesson had led to this moment. The battle lasted for hours, stretching across vast regions of space. But in the end, it was the Terran flag that stood above the wreckage. The Zorath, who had never known true fear, now faced something they could not control. The silence that followed the final explosion was not peace. It was shock, as both enemy and ally realized the tide of war had shifted. Humanity, once underestimated, had delivered a blow that would echo across the stars. And though many more battles were to come, the message was clear. The Terran Federation was no longer a rising force. It was now the spearhead of a new galactic era. The aftermath of the first battle of the Terran Armada sent shockwaves through every corner of the galaxy. The Zorath, once proud rulers of the stars, had suffered a defeat so massive that even their most loyal commanders began to question the strength of their empire. But pride ran deep in the ancient race, and instead of surrendering, they responded with fury. From the far reaches of their dark territories, they gathered their remaining fleets, old war machines pulled from forgotten storage moons, and elite warriors bred only for final battles. Their counter-offensive came swift and brutal, striking at weaker systems and border colonies, hoping to break the new alliance before it fully solidified. But this time, they faced more than just humanity. The galaxy had changed. Species that had once remained silent now stood shoulder to shoulder under a single flag, not of control, but of cooperation. It was the Terran Federation that led the charge, not by force, but by example. Human commanders shared tactics, engineers distributed technology, and medics crossed species lines to save lives that once would have been considered foreign. Every liberated world added another voice to the cause, another fleet to the ever-growing alliance. As the Terran fleets reclaimed planets scorched by war, they did not install rulers or claim land. Instead, they offered partnership, protection, and the promise of something greater. In the center of it all was Earth, once seen as a small, irrelevant planet, now remembered as the origin of the spark that lit a fire across the stars. Humanity's journey from scattered colonies to galactic leaders had not been easy. Many lives had been lost, and the cost of victory grew heavier with every step forward. Memorial ships floated quietly in the silence of space, carrying the names of those who had fallen. Yet, the people did not grieve in despair. They grieved in purpose. For every loss gave weight to their mission. Children across human and alien worlds learned the names of Terran heroes, and the phrase, "We are one fleet," became more than a slogan. It became a belief. Even as the Zorath continued to strike, it was clear they were fading. Their forces shrank with each battle, their commanders grew reckless, and their unity cracked under pressure. Meanwhile, the alliance grew stronger. Humans helped rebuild what had been destroyed. On former battlegrounds, they planted crops where craters had been. And in the silence left behind by the fallen, hope began to take root. The last great push came when the Alliance cornered the remaining Zorath fleets near the dying star of Uvex 9. There, the final battle was not one of surprise or chaos, but of strategy and determination. The Terran-led armada did not charge blindly. They moved as a storm, coordinated and precise. By the end of the conflict, the Zorath fled into the unknown regions of space, broken and scattered, no longer a threat, but a shadow of what they once were. When peace finally returned, it did not come with celebration, but with reflection. The galaxy had survived, but it had changed forever. Borders meant less now. Flags were fewer. In their place stood a shared future, one shaped by the blood and courage of those who had refused to kneel. Humanity, once doubted and dismissed, had not just earned a place among the stars. They had built a path for others to follow. And though the war had ended, its lessons lived on. Across every system, from the frozen moons of the Nikiri to the cloud cities of the Zalnar, beings looked to the stars with new eyes. They no longer feared the darkness. They remembered that when the sky was at its darkest, it was the light of human will that broke through. The galaxy had once fallen silent in fear, but now the silence carried meaning. It was the sound of peace earned, of unity forged, and of a dawn rising, not just for Earth, but for all. Humanity had fought. Humanity had endured, and in doing so, they had changed the fate of the universe.